This episode is brought to you by Trailer Park Yard Games, where over 28 games are delivered directly to your party. We park the trailer, you party. Take it all in.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we're all screwed up.
Yeah.
Well, I think it started, though, with TV. You know, and if we go back, it wasn't that many years ago when on TV you couldn't cuss. There was no way.
You're damn right.
Yeah. I don't know if we can do that on here.
Ass, damn, and hell are in the Bible. Those are the three that I want to say.
So anyways.
Excellent.
But you couldn't cuss. You couldn't do certain things on TV. And, you know, my
Let's
wife...
have a chat, talk this and that with PB and Jaisy.
Hello, and welcome to the PB and Jaisy podcast. My name is Jaisy George.
Hi, Jaisy.
Hey.
How you doing
This
today?
is Sarah and Bill.
And I'm Bill Stedham.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here on the podcast that we
for
do
inviting
together.
Yeah, I've never been here before. This is kind of cool.
Yeah, you'll learn real quick. It'll be easy. Well,
it's
me and
fun.
Sarah will just make fun of you the whole time.
Yeah, you know, make fun of old people. I think that's called senior abuse.
You know, speaking of old people, there is a whole generation of people who think that therapy is not anything that should be paid any mind to. There's like, my parents included, Bill, I think Bill's good. That think that, like, you know, why would you go to someone and talk about
I think it's taboo
problems?
a little bit too.
Yeah. I think talking about it probably makes it real. So they don't want to relive it or talk about it. It's easier just to kind of shove the feelings down. Or a big common thing growing up that I would see would just be, just pray about it. And, you know, that will somehow fix it and make it just go away. Not to say that prayer is not like a great thing. You know, of course, that's a wonderful tool, but I think therapy is also a really good thing. So we are joined by the lovely Dr. Charity Kurz. Thank you so much for being here. You're going to tell me what your last name is. Kurz.
It's Kurz.
Kurz. Okay.
I have about 10 things I need your help with. I'm just kidding.
Well, you have Justina, who was also on the podcast, told me about Dr. And when she was telling me all the different titles, I was like, okay, so every title that you've given me is a therapist. Because she said, she's a doctor, she's a professor, she's a mom, she's a pastor, she's a wife. And I was like, okay, so all of those are just different ways of saying therapist.
Right,
So,
right.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
So I am a professor. I teach for a university online, which is wonderful. So I work from home, which is great. And then I also see clients in our local community. And and I'm a wife and I'm a mom, all those other things that you said too.
You have to think back. Okay, what
real
all do I
estate's
do?
kind of that way too. I feel like we're, glorified counselors, not necessarily therapists, but
yes.
we get to see a lot of that emotional side and state. And then back to like what you were talking about, how it's, it's a little bit taboo. And I can remember, because we've seen a marriage counselor since 2018. It's the best thing we've ever could have done. And it wasn't necessarily that, you don't have to wait to have a problem to go do something.
Exactly.
Like anything that you care about, really, you should be working on. You should have a coach, a mentor, just having an outlet, just to have someone, an uninterested third party, if you will, be able just to take that information and help you work through things.
Yeah, and be objective, I think, in telling you, kind of like a bird's eye view of like, okay, you're saying this, but what I'm hearing is this. And speaking about generations that, there is, of course, that generation that doesn't think that therapy is anything. And then there's a whole new generation that's kind of coming up that is living in this weird post-pandemic life where they don't know, like, one, they don't have the tools socially. So are you seeing that a lot with children that you're having therapy with?
Yes, I think that's one of the concerns that people that work with children and adolescents have really talked about in the field is what did the pandemic do to affect development of children, the social emotional pieces. And we are already seeing the academic concerns in schools, like students are just really behind, but I wonder how it will continue to progress forward from a social perspective, especially those that are preteens that missed out a few years as they're moving towards what Erickson would call identity versus role confusion and trying to figure out who they are. So I'm just wondering what we'll see as ramifications in the years to come on development of children.
Well, and I think too, like you think about a year with a kid is totally different than a year for us as adults.
Exactly.
A year for us as adults is a blink of an eye, but as a kid,
And it's all the same.
Yeah, it's a lot
like
of this
for
starts
us,
to
a
run
year isn't
together.
going to. But yeah, when you're a kid, there's so many developmental.
But think about from birth to a
milestones
year and everything that happens, or a year to two. I mean, there's just so many, and even as adolescents and preteens and all that, like there's so much happening, and just a year and a half, almost 2 years of your life is not erased, but it's just
skipped.
different.
It's
Yeah,
very
and none of
different.
us know how to guide anybody because we've never been through this before. That's
Well,
the other problem.
and societies went nuts. You know, all of a sudden, people will tell you things on Facebook or on social media that they would never say to your
for
face
sure, yeah.
because someone would pound their nose, and now it doesn't happen. And people have learned how or forgotten how to behave as adults.
Exactly.
And then, you know, it's interesting that you say that about generations, because when I was growing up, no one would go see a therapist. It was like,
You have to be like insane.
well,
or,
yeah,
you know.
if you go see this person, they're going to put you in a straitjacket, and then they're going to put you in a room that's padded, and we'll never see you again.
Yeah.
That actually sounds pretty.
That's
fun.
really what they, yeah. But that's really what people think of
Yeah.
when you say, "Oh, I see a therapist," or I talk to someone, or even like marital counseling and stuff like that. People, if you say that you're in marital counseling, people immediately think like, "Oh, you must have these big problems. You're on the brink of divorce." When it's a lot of
should
it
be
is
the
just
opposite. If
a
you're
lot
not
of it
going
is
to-
preventative.
Yes.
Just to keep you in a good space.
Well, and I think that's what's important, to get that out so that people understand that and they know that there's not an issue there. I think it's a good thing, but it is, as you said, it's generational, and it's something that people my age and older, it wasn't something that was ever talked about.
Well, and I think you can probably speak to this, but I feel like there's a movement of self-care and, just removing some of the
Stigma.
Yeah, the stigma behind mental health. And there's even movies and TikTok and Reels and Instagram and things that are just centered around discovering yourself, and it's okay to not be okay. And so how have you seen that progress, and how is that a helpful thing? What do you see for the future?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think generationally, we have seen counseling be taboo, right? You only go if you have a problem. It's a sign of weakness to go to therapy. And I think that we are seeing, at least with this new generation, kind of a move towards normalizing, if you will, going to therapy, people being more open and honest about having a counselor, whether it's on social media, whether it's just in conversation. But I do think that there's still a generational divide as far as it relates to that. And I also worry on some levels that it's become kind of this a trend, if you will, to go to therapy rather than really fully understanding what the purpose of therapy is, if that makes sense.
Almost like a badge of honor.
Yeah, and it's almost
girl,
like,
I need therapy.
exactly, or glamorized, right? Because
Right.
even when we watch television or we see things in the media and the movies, it's kind of like this glamorized view of what therapy looks
And
like.
it's an instant fix.
Exactly. And therapy is not like that. I mean, therapy is a journey. I think that's one of the things too that I always remind my clients, that this is not an easy fix. This is a process, because a lot of people end up in therapy for things that they've been doing or engaging in for years. And so you have to think about like having to rework the brain on some levels of responding differently than they used to respond, or how they're used to responding.
Right. And I think for me, like self-awareness and all that is something I've really been working on. And I think you do have that thought of, oh, this is going to make me so much better, but you've got to expose all the crap first.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not easier, it's harder.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty.
Yeah, you got to roll up your sleeves and get in there. And I think so many people have that, just a different mindset of, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to put a Band-Aid on this and I'm going to be better, and if nothing else, it's harder.
Yeah. And I think people kind of come to this crossroads, if you will, and this happens a lot in therapy, where they have to make a decision if they're ready to do what it takes to be better. Right. And I'm not talking about being better as in behaviors, but just feeling better, engaging in better mindsets. Yeah. And sometimes that costs people so much, because it means setting aside patterns of behavior and thinking that they held. It means setting aside relationships. Maybe it's setting aside other tangible things in their lives. And so they have to make this decision. And sometimes people aren't ready to continue on the journey, and they have to take a break and then come back when they're ready to do that. And I tell my clients too, a lot of the work in counseling is not done in that session. It's done outside of the session. It's done when they're at home at night and they're thinking about what was talked about, It's done when they're in the heat of the moment and they're experiencing something that brings a lot of emotion, that's where the work is done. And I think that clients need to understand that when they come into the process, that it really is a process and it's a day-by-day thing. It's not just that 40, 50-minute session that you're getting once a week.
Right.
So what are some things that people can look for, especially with what we're talking about with like a like trying to navigate getting back into social settings when you maybe don't feel comfortable anymore? Like what are things that people can look for within themselves or, friends and things to maybe encourage them to talk to someone?
I think one of the things that I have noticed as a therapist that people are starting to recognize that they do have some deficits, right? Maybe before that wasn't as noticeable, but with the pandemic, it was almost kind of like a filter for them to see, oh, these are some things. And one of the big ones that I keep seeing is just this inability to recognize feelings. I think, talking about generational, a lot of the younger or the older generation were taught to stuff those feelings. I think you mentioned that a little bit ago, but we're taught to stuff those feelings. And so we don't really actually do what we need to do with them. And then after a while, they come out in things like anger or rage or frustration or depression or anxiety or something along those lines. And so I have noticed that people are recognizing that they don't really know how to do that. They don't really know what to do with those feelings. And so a lot of the work, even with adults that I do, is helping them to recognize those feelings and emotions and then how those things impact them socially in their relationships, because that's another piece. If you're struggling with feelings and emotions, to be able to recognize the interplay in the relationship is also really hard sometimes too, because people don't know why they're feeling the way that they're feeling or why they're frustrated in this relationship, or why they don't want to talk to this person, right? And so I think, I do think that there's work that needs to be done. And I think there's been social deficits for a long time. And I think personally that social media and the internet has really played a big role in that. Oh my gosh, has really changed the way we interact. And, like you mentioned earlier, people put things on the internet that we never would have said. I mean,
they're so brave. Keyboard warriors.
Yeah. So you would never say that face to face because you knew that it was inappropriate but there's like this filter that's gone, when you get online. And I think, I just think that the social media piece has really impacted that as well.
I see social media almost like cigarettes were. Like a long time ago. Like it was just what people did. They were on planes and doctors' offices and no one even thought like, this isn't going to hurt us. Yeah. Like it's just a thing that we do. And I think social media is kind of that way. Yeah. Like it's literally ripping us apart as a community.
And people are addicted to it.
Majorly.
Yeah. And then, years down the line, we're like, oh, that's why we have this, cancer. And that's why we have these things that are tearing us apart and separating us as humans. And, it's crazy and we don't know. And we're literally handing it to the kids saying, good luck, figure out your life. And it's scary.
With kids, that's just a whole nother level of bullying that kids have to go through. Even when, there was the lockdown and stuff like that. I remember hearing stories of kids that were getting really badly bullied and they didn't have the normal social outlets to see their friends, to vent about it or to talk about it or to, feel any sort of camaraderie. So I know that was a depression just went up. Yeah. So, are you seeing that a lot?
Statistically, I mean, the research is showing that we are seeing the increase of depression, anxiety among young people. I would also say too, like in my own experience, I didn't grow up with social media. I'm kind of dating myself a little bit.
Goodness,
but
I'm that way too.
I think one of the things that concerns me is that when a kid is bullied at school, they get home can be their safe spot, right? Home can be their safe space. But now with social media and kids having access to that, and they're getting bullied at school, they're getting bullied online.
It follows
There's
them.
There's no safe space to be able to just kind of decompress from what they've experienced. I mean, because bullying, real talk, bullying has been around for a long time. It's not something that is brand new and it's just now worse. I think it's just more, if that makes sense, because now there's more ways to do it.
There's no escape.
There is no escape.
But we're inviting it in.
Exactly.
We're taking it into our bedrooms and in our hands and wherever. It's everywhere we go. And in any time we go to look, usually we're turning to our phones because we want to feel better.
Exactly.
And so we're in this raw place of needing something better. And then it's like, here's all the crap, Yeah. And it's scary.
Or even it could not even, it could sometimes be something that's not even directed at you.
Exactly.
But social media can make you feel like oh, well, why am I not doing that? Like, why, oh, this
Less
looks so
than.
great, but I'm, why am I not there? This person did this and I didn't, get that or whatever. And that's another hard thing. And that's not even directed at you. You're just basically creating the problem yourself.
Well, and people try to, they post their best side.
Right.
And
there's
oftentimes
Instagram
it's
versus
filtered
reality
and,
all the time.
made up and everything else. That's not what it looks like in real life.
Right.
And then it spreads, we've been talking about kids, but let's just look at adults and, let's go back to politics, which will stay out of politics, but let's just look at how the politicians behave. All of a sudden they lost their filter completely. If we look at some of those debates, none of those were presidential.
Right.
From either side, from anybody involved in them. And where does that behavior come from? It's got to come from because we're polluting our bodies, our minds with something.
Yeah, I believe personally as a therapist that your thoughts impact your behaviors,
Absolutely.
And so I agree with you. I think that there was like this sense of loss of professionalism in a lot of that. And I think it's just in general, I don't think that people realize a couple things. One, that they are creating a digital footprint every time they put something online, right? It could go back and be traced. I know people are like, but I took it down, I deleted it, but that's not how that actually works. And I don't think the other thing that people recognize is that there is a psychology behind all of this as far as what's posted and how it's posted. If you ever get a chance to watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
It'll make you want to throw your phone away.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen that.
So good. And it really talks about how these algorithms of how they generate the content that you're seeing, right? So as you're scrolling through and how it's putting those things together to give you a message. And I think that's one thing we have to recognize is that we're being fed things that aren't necessarily true. And we need to be able to step back and say, okay, what is truth, right? Because I'm interpreting what I'm seeing as truth, but that might not be truth. It's kind of scary on some levels because I think personally I've struggled with, what do you believe? And how do you navigate what you're seeing and what you're hearing? And sometimes for me, that means I just shut that stuff off.
Well, and I was reading a book that was saying that we are innately, as humans, made to worship. Like that is it's just in our being to worship. And whether, whatever that is, and it's scary to know that sometimes it's whatever lands in your lap and whatever is in front of your face. And we're on autopilot over half of our life. And so now we've got this technology that is smarter than itself. And that's the Social Dilemma was talking about that. These algorithms and these systems outsmart themselves. They're so smart. And so they know when you're lonely and sad and tired and hungry or angry, and they can directly market to that emotion that you're probably having based on what you clicked and how many times you picked up your phone. And they know to put your ex-girlfriend's picture up when you're sad and lonely and to target that because you're more likely to shop when you're sad. Like it's that crazy. And we just willingly take it all in. And then we wonder why we're all screwed up.
Well, I think it started though with TV, and if we go back, it wasn't that many years ago when on TV you couldn't cuss. There was no way.
You're damn right.
I don't know if we can do that on here.
Ass, damn, and hell are in the Bible. Those are the three that I want to say.
So anyways, but you couldn't cuss. You couldn't do certain things on TV. And, my wife and I stopped watching TV years ago. So we have one, we watch football. And that's it. But now if you were to watch something on TV, you can actually watch a full-blown murder, anything you want to see. And having come from a line of work where we investigated that type of stuff out of law enforcement, some of that is realistic and graphical. And
what you take in, you put out.
Everything and that's what happens, right? So now we have kids coming out doing stupid things. We have adults doing stupid things. So now we'll carry it into Facebook where we just lose our filters completely. So then we'll go ahead and drive out there and just do whatever we want to do.
Well, I think we have to recognize too that seeing some of those things is traumatic. I don't think that we talk enough about that kind of trauma, even though it's not real, it's still traumatic to
And your
see
brain doesn't
something
know
like
the
that.
difference.
Exactly. And so I think that is another big piece that I know for me personally, there's certain things I cannot watch because of my experience as a counselor and the things that I hear. That to me is not entertainment to hear or to watch some things that my clients have actually experienced, you know?
Right.
And so I think, there's a trauma component to that. And trauma really we're finding that trauma really embeds itself in the brain and it stays with you and it actually impacts your body. There's a really great book about it called The Body Keeps the Score. And so whether we're experiencing trauma or it's vicarious trauma or it's secondhand, regardless, that it's trauma. And I think that we have to recognize that too.
And is trauma, and you may be able to speak to this, like the arrested development as far as like the trauma the first trauma you experience, and that's kind of where some of your mental capacity kind of pauses. And so now everything you've learned and how you interact with other traumas in your life is all frozen at that time period that you had your first trauma. So speak to that a little bit. How do, us growing up and things we experience, how does that affect us later in life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one thing. I'm not very Freudian, right, in that sense, but I do think that our early childhood experiences do impact us more than we realize. And sometimes it's almost subconsciously that we realize like we're engaging in this behavior because of something we experienced so long ago, but it takes a long time to kind of come to that realization. And sometimes a counselor to help bring that up. I think about like attachment in particular. We talk about trauma and attachment. If you don't have a good attachment relationship with a caregiver early on, there's actually research to suggest that you may not have a good attachment with a romantic partner later in life. Gotcha. And so I think that there's a lot of us that probably have experienced some sort of traumatic events and never really dealt with it or didn't see it as trauma. And I think the other piece too here is you can grow up in the same home and experience the same things, but one person experiences or takes it in differently than the other person. And so someone could have experienced trauma from that, whereas somebody else might not have. So I think that's another piece too, that all of us are kind of wired differently, and our levels of resiliency are also different.
I think it's scary thinking about, all the things that could happen to you as you develop, and then there's people that are handed children and just say,
but what you're saying is so true. So, in my house, not to get super specific, but my mom and dad divorced when I was 6 or 7. And I didn't see her again for 51 years.
Wow.
51 years. And I'm sure that there are people in my life, like a couple ex-wives, that probably had some
that you were looking for mom. Not to sound creepy, but that you were trying to fill that place that you had lost.
Sure.
Yeah, so not to do a thing on Bill, but
do me and Jaisy need
Bill,
to leave
we want to
so
talk
you guys
about
can have
it.
a session?
Thank you so much,
but
Dr. Charity, for being here. We're going to go ahead and leave. You can go ahead and just.
But the reality is, we didn't do any kind of counseling.
Yeah.
That didn't exist back then. Mm-hmm. And if it did, there was such a stigmatism to it. And, even in the military, I can remember, going through the clearances and getting, some very high level clearances. They all asked about if you had any type of counseling or any type of therapy, and that was frowned upon. Mm-hmm. So there were actually things to adjudicate whether or not you could move forward on a security clearance on that. So hopefully society's changed quite a bit on that.
Well, I would rather get on an airplane that's just been worked on instead of
because then you feel like, it's new, it's good.
So they were basically like discouraging you from having counseling, saying that you would be not as prepared, where in reality you would be more prepared.
Tools.
Yeah, you now have the tools. That's so crazy.
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, as you know, and listening to one the other day with Molly Fletcher on it, and she's interviewing this running back who was talking about the fact that he went to therapy and it was unheard of. He's a professional football player, and he's the only one in his locker room that went to therapy. Mm-hmm. And he said he was actually frowned upon, but it helped him so much to get through things. And so very interesting set of circumstances out there.
I listen to, I've recently started listening to this podcast called The Soft White Underbelly, where it's basically, it's set in LA.
They're talking about fat white men?
It's they talk about Bill. No, it's based in LA, and they talk to these people in all walks of life. So literally each episode is called like interview with a drug dealer, interview with a prostitute, interview with this. And it's literally just a person that they pick up off the street and they just sit down and they just say, oh, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about this, tell me about your life. It is so it's really, really interesting. And the first question that they ask is, tell me about your childhood. And some of them have trauma that happened when they were like 2 or 18 months old or 3 or 5 or extremely young at ages where as a parent you think, oh, they're not going to remember that, or that's not really whatever. And so as a parent, that made me really think like, man, I really have to like safeguard my children because they are at such a moldable age of a lot of the tools that they use as an adult, a lot of the things that they seek for as being an adult come from things that they need when they're children.
Well, and I think the trauma, I mean, there's things that we can't control, but what you can do is teach them when it happens how to deal with it. And I think that's the missing piece because we all have trauma, but we need the tools and the resources to get through that and to know how to deal with it. Kids are walking around and have no idea how to deal with emotions and feelings and I pray that people find people like you that can talk them through that and that they seek that. So I do love this movement of self-care and self-awareness, and I just
Self-love.
hope that it.
Well, I think this next segment will actually demonstrate.
We've got Tales from the Lockbox.
Yeah, Tales from the Lockbox. So we won't identify the organization or anything that this is involved in just to protect the innocent. But we're in real estate, right? So in real estate, weird things happen. And I'm reading this story once where a manager was talking to one of their bosses, and this manager says, hey, I've got to figure out what to do with Charlie. And the boss says, what do you mean, Charlie? And, do we need to terminate an agent or what's the issue? And he said, oh no, he's dead.
He's already been terminated.
Can't terminate him anymore.
The manager
He was promoted.
Yeah, the manager's like, stop, say what? And he says, well, we have this box of cremains that someone dropped off. And the manager says, what are you talking about? And so the story goes that they sold a house, and obviously the family had experienced some difficult situation because when Dad died, they had his cremains brought back to the house and they stuck them in the microwave.
Is that the actual word, cremains?
We looked it up because I thought it was Bill just being weird enough.
Okay.
No, that's
Wow.
Remains. It's called cremains.
Yeah, the cremation remains. They've made one word.
That is a
it makes
really
sense.
creepy word.
Cremains.
Okay. So now that this is out there, I hope I'm correct on the word usage, but let's just say.
No, we Googled you when you said it because I was like, oh, Bill. And
So
it was right.
yeah, they always check the
We
old
fact
book.
check.
But anyway,
With
so
Google.
this family obviously wasn't very close, and they stuck Dad in the microwave. And
Like just to store him.
That's how they cremated him?
no. It was done, but to a funeral home and all.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
Was it in a wood box, in a ceramic container?
I think the story
Tupperware.
says it's now in a cardboard box, and inside the cardboard box is a bag. Anyway, so this is sitting in the microwave for many years, and then the family sells the house, and they take all their belongings. The microwave's built in, but they don't open the microwave. They leave Dad behind. Well, guess what? The new family moves into the house, and they open up the microwave, and there's a box, and it's clearly identified on the box
Deity.
what's there.
Dad's
And
cremains.
It's got Charlie's name on it,
my
and
goodness.
according to this story, it's got
Did
the
they
location.
not have any like shelf space to put him on? They had to put him in the microwave?
Maybe he
I don't know.
loved popcorn or something.
But
Did they not use the microwave? That's what I want to know.
well,
That's confusing, too.
Apparently not,
They
because
just take him out. Oh, just take Dad out real quick.
that's
Zach-
according to where this
Zach
story
at
was.
dinner.
Charlie was. So according to the story, here's the funny part of it, I guess, if
This
there's a
is the
funny
funny
part. So they bring the box into a real estate office and they say, hey, someone left this behind. Can we drop it off? And the person working the front desk takes it. Well, then they've left. Now the real estate office owns this box of cremains, and you can't like just go throw it out. Now you're stuck with, I don't know what they did with this box.
It's like hot potato. Like who's
yeah.
stuck with
TBD.
With-
We'll
They
keep you
call the
updated.
family? They'd have to call the family, right?
Well,
Well, the family
I
is
would
the one
assume
who brought him.
the family intentionally forgot dad, and they tried to find the family according to the story and haven't been
my
able to.
goodness.
So it is it's an interesting story, and with that we probably should level up.
Please level us
Yes,
up.
let's
from that.
level up. So, something I found online, it says emotional pain is not something that should be hidden away or never spoken about. There's a truth in your pain, there's a growth in your pain, but only if it's first brought out to the open. And that's Stephen Atchison. And so, my challenge to you is to share your story, share your truth. There's people that are literally waiting. I keep saying literally, that are waiting for you to open up so they can share. And so as you start to share, you realize that you're not alone in what you're feeling. And I highly recommend finding someone to talk to, someone you trust. You know, I don't know that social media is always the best place to put everything, but you know, there is a good outlet for some of your stuff. So just don't be afraid to share your truth, be authentic, be real, and you know, just reach out. Somebody will reach back.
Yes, and thank you so much, Charity, for being
you.
here with us and
That
sharing
flew by.
a wealth of wisdom. I feel like we just scratched the surface. So we will be sure to leave some resources in the description box below. Please check them out. Please like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
We out.
Just had a chat, talk this and that with PB and Jaisy.